The dust hung thick in the air as Kieran Vance squinted through the haze, his weathered hand adjusting the brim of his Stetson to shield his eyes from the merciless Arizona sun. It was the summer of 1876, and the territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. He'd been trailing a small herd of cattle for nearly 3 weeks, making his way to Tucson where decent money awaited, when something unusual caught his eye, a splash of faded blue fabric against the reddish-brown earth. Drawing closer, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just abandoned clothing, but a woman. She lay motionless in the dust, her dark hair splayed across the ground, her once fine dress torn and soiled from what must have been a terrible ordeal. Kieran dismounted in a fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He approached cautiously, one hand hovering near his revolver, a habit born from years on the frontier. But as he knelt beside her, he saw her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Relief washed over him. She was alive, though barely. Her skin was burned from the sun, lips cracked from dehydration. Without hesitation, he uncorked his canteen and gently lifted her head, letting a few precious drops of water pass between her parched lips. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. 3 weeks alone with cattle wasn't conducive to maintaining social graces. The woman's eyes opened slowly, revealing irises the color of summer sage. Confusion and fear flickered across her face as she struggled to focus on him. "Where?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "You're hurt," he stated, concern deepening the lines around his eyes. "I need to get you somewhere safe. Get you some help." "No," she protested feebly, attempting to push him away. "They might still be." "Who might?" Kieran asked sharply, scanning the horizon again with new vigilance. But she had slipped back into unconsciousness, her strength exhausted by those few words. Kieran considered his options. The nearest proper town was Silver Creek, and that was a good day's ride with his cattle in tow. He couldn't leave her here, and she needed medical attention sooner rather than later. With a decision made, he carefully gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. As he stood, her head lolled against his chest, and a fierce protectiveness surged through him. "I ain't leaving without you," he declared softly to the unconscious woman, a promise to her and to himself. "You'll be all right now." Returning to his horse, he managed to lift her into the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm securing her against him. With his free hand, he gathered the reins of his horse and those of his pack mule. "Hiya!" he called to the small herd of cattle, setting them in motion toward Silver Creek. The woman in his arms was a complication he hadn't anticipated. But Kieran Vance wasn't a man who could ride past someone in need, especially not a woman alone in the unforgiving wilderness. As they rode, the sun beat down relentlessly, and Kieran periodically offered water to his unconscious charge, dribbling small amounts between her lips. He wondered who she was, what circumstances had brought her to such a dire situation. Her clothes, though now tattered and stained, were of fine quality, not the practical garments of a frontier woman. By mid-afternoon, the woman began to stir again. This time when her eyes opened, they seemed clearer, more focused. "Where?" she began, then tensed as she realized she was on horseback, held by a stranger. "Easy," Kieran soothed. "Name's Kieran Vance. I found you collapsed back there. Taking you to Silver Creek to get you looked at." She relaxed slightly, perhaps recognizing the name of the town or simply too exhausted to fight. "Zara," she said after a moment. "Zara Calloway." "Miss Calloway," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Can you tell me what happened? How you came to be alone out here?" Zara closed her eyes, as if the memory pained her physically. "Stagecoach. We were attacked. 3 days ago, I think. Everyone else." Her voice broke. Raiders? Kieran asked, his jaw tightening. She nodded weakly. I ran. Hid in the rocks until they left. Been walking ever since, trying to find help. 3 days, he repeated, incredulous. You've been wandering for 3 days? Again she nodded. No water, just what I had in my bag. Lost that yesterday. Kieran's respect for her resilience grew immensely. Most people wouldn't have lasted a single day in the Arizona wilderness without water. We'll be in Silver Creek by nightfall, he promised. Dr. Franklin there is a good man. He'll fix you up. Zara seemed to take comfort in his words, allowing herself to relax against him as they continued their journey. Kieran found himself acutely aware of her presence, the scent of her hair beneath the dust, the way her breathing had steadied, the trusting way she leaned into him despite knowing nothing about him. As the afternoon wore on, Kieran kept one eye on his cattle and the other on the horizon, wary of the raiders Zara had mentioned. The territory had been relatively peaceful in recent months, but lawlessness was never far from the surface in these parts. Why are you helping me? Zara asked suddenly, her voice stronger than before. The question caught Kieran off guard. What kind of man would I be if I rode past a woman in need? The kind most men are, she replied with surprising bitterness. Kieran considered this. Maybe I've met too many of those men myself. Didn't much care for what I saw. He paused. My mother raised me better. This seemed to satisfy Zara, who fell quiet again. After a while, she asked, The cattle, they're yours. They are now. Bought them in New Mexico, taking them to sell in Tucson. You're a long way from Tucson. Kieran chuckled. That I am. This route's longer but safer. Less chance of running into Apache war parties or other trouble. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, considering the trouble he'd found anyway. Didn't expect to see you for another week at least. The older man called out, then noticed Zara. What's this? Who's the lady? Found her collapsed about 20 miles east, Kieran explained, carefully dismounting while supporting Zara. She needs the doctor. Raiders hit her stagecoach. Miller's expression darkened. Again? That's the third one this month. Sheriff Thompson needs to form a posse and deal with those vermin once and for all. Later, Hank, Kieran said, lifting Zara into his arms. She was more alert now but still too weak to walk. Can you look after my stock? I need to get her to Dr. Franklin. Course, Miller agreed, already moving to take charge of the cattle. Doc's probably at his office this time of day. Kieran carried Zara down the main street, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. He ignored them, focused on getting her the help she needed. The doctor's office was a small white building with a painted sign announcing J. Franklin, M.D. Kieran shouldered open the door without ceremony. Dr. Jonathan Franklin, a thin man in his 50s with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, looked up from his desk with surprise. You're lucky, young lady, Dr. Franklin told Zara. This could have been much worse. As it is, you're suffering from dehydration and exposure, but with proper care you should recover fully. Thank you, Zara whispered, wincing as the doctor applied an antiseptic to the wound. Kieran stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. I'll leave you to it then, he said. I need to see to my cattle and find a place to stay. Mr. Vance, Zara called, her voice tinged with something like panic. You'll come back. Kieran met her eyes, understanding her fear of being left alone in a strange town after her ordeal. I'll be back, he promised. You rest now. Outside, Kieran returned to the livery where Hank had already settled his cattle in a small holding pen. After discussing arrangements for their care, he collected his saddlebags and headed to the Silver Creek Hotel, a modest 2-story building that catered to the infrequent travelers passing through. Martha Jenkins, The hotel proprietress greeted him with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Vance, back so soon? We weren't expecting you till next month." "Change of plans, Martha," he explained, signing the register. "Need 2 rooms if you've got them." Martha raised an eyebrow. "2? That wouldn't have anything to do with the injured woman you brought to Doc Franklin's, would it?" News traveled fast in small towns. "It would," Kieran confirmed. "She'll need a place to stay once the doctor's done with her." "I've only got 1 room available right now," Martha said apologetically. "The Hendersons have family visiting, and they've taken the other 2. Kieran frowned. "I'll take it for Miss Calloway, then. I can bed down at the livery with my stock." Martha shook her head. "Nonsense. The room has 2 beds. It's not ideal, but if the lady doesn't object, it would be proper enough with me as chaperone in the hotel. Better than the alternative." Kieran wasn't entirely comfortable with the arrangement, but he recognized the practicality of it. "I'll discuss it with Miss Calloway and the doctor," he agreed reluctantly. After settling his belongings in the room, Kieran stopped at the telegraph office to send a message to his buyer in Tucson, explaining the delay. Under the circumstances, with Mrs. Jenkins as chaperone, it seems the most reasonable solution. "I'll explain it to Miss Calloway when she wakes." "I'll check back in the morning," Kieran said, "and I'll speak with Sheriff Thompson about the raiders." "One more thing," Dr. Franklin added as Kieran turned to leave. "She mentioned traveling to San Francisco. Apparently, she has a cousin there, her only living relative, from what I gathered." Kieran absorbed this information with a nod. It complicated matters, knowing she had somewhere to be, someone expecting her. But first things first, she needed to recover her strength. He found Sheriff Thompson at his office, a weathered man in his 40s with a perpetually tired expression that deepened when Kieran told him about Zara and the stagecoach attack. "3rd one this month," Thompson confirmed, echoing Hank Miller's words. "We think it's Nate Cassidy's gang. Used to just rob mining payrolls, but they've graduated to stagecoaches. More regular targets." "Any survivors from the other attacks?" Thompson shook his head grimly. "Your Miss Calloway is the first. Maybe she can help us identify them." "She's not in any condition to be questioned right now," Kieran said firmly. "Course not," Thompson agreed. "But when she's recovered a bit, we need to stop these animals before more innocent folks die." Kieran couldn't argue with that. "I'll bring her by when the doctor says she's ready." The next morning, Kieran rose early, checked on his cattle, then returned to Dr. Franklin's office. He found Zara awake, sitting up in bed, looking remarkably improved from the day before. The doctor had provided her with a simple dress to replace her ruined one. "Mr. Vance?" she greeted him, a small smile touching her lips. "Dr. Franklin tells me I owe you my life." Kieran shook his head, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," she replied, her green eyes holding his steadily. An awkward silence fell, broken by Dr. Franklin clearing his throat. "I've explained the situation with the accommodations, Miss Calloway. Are you comfortable with the arrangement?" Zara nodded. "Under the circumstances, I have little choice, and I trust Mr. Vance." Her eyes met Kieran's again. "He could have taken advantage of my vulnerable state many times over already, if that had been his intention." Kieran felt a flush creeping up his neck at her directness. "I've arranged for some proper clothes for you at the general store," he said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Wheeler, the owner's wife, is about your size. She's set aside some things for you to try." Zara's eyes widened. "That's very kind, but I can't possibly accept—" "Consider it a loan," Kieran interrupted, "until you can make other arrangements." After some further discussion, Dr. Franklin declared Zara fit to leave his care, provided she continued to rest and avoid exertion for several days. Kieran escorted her first to the general store, where Mrs. Wheeler had indeed prepared several practical outfits appropriate for frontier life. Zara selected 2 dresses, undergarments, a shawl, and sturdy boots, promising to reimburse Mrs. Wheeler as soon as she could access her funds. "My trunk was on the stagecoach," she explained to Kieran as they left the store. "Everything I own was in it." "The sheriff might be able to recover some items, if they find the site," Kieran offered, though he didn't hold much hope. Raiders typically took anything of value. At the hotel, Martha Jenkins welcomed Zara warmly, showing her to the room she would share with Kieran. The arrangement was awkward, but Martha's matter-of-fact attitude helped ease the tension. "This is highly irregular," Zara commented once they were alone in the room. "But I appreciate your help, Mr. Vance." "Kieran," he corrected, "and I understand your discomfort. I'll sleep elsewhere if you'd prefer." Zara shook her head. "That would defeat the purpose of the arrangement, wouldn't it? Besides," she added with a small smile, "after sleeping on rocks for 3 nights, a bed is a luxury regardless of who's across the room." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Kieran would rise early to tend his cattle, then return to escort Zara to breakfast at the hotel's small dining room. In the afternoons, while she rested, he would see to business around town, gathering supplies for the remainder of his journey to Tucson. In the evenings, they would share dinner, often joined by Martha or Dr. Franklin. During these shared meals, Kieran learned more about Zara. She was 26, the daughter of a Boston merchant who had fallen on hard times before his death 2 years prior. Her mother had passed away when she was young. With no prospects remaining in Boston, she had decided to accept an invitation from her cousin in San Francisco, who had offered her a home and the possibility of work in her dressmaking shop. "I've never been farther west than Philadelphia before this journey," she admitted one evening. "I thought it would be an adventure." Kieran noted the shadow that crossed her face. "Not the kind of adventure you were hoping for, I imagine." "No," she agreed quietly, "though it's had its moments of unexpected kindness." Her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them. On the 4th day of her stay, Sheriff Thompson requested to speak with Zara about the stagecoach attack. Kieran accompanied her to his office, protective despite her assurances that she felt strong enough for the interview. Zara's account was detailed and clear. The stagecoach had been traveling from Santa Fe, with stops planned at several settlements before reaching Tucson. There had been 5 passengers, including herself, plus the driver and a shotgun guard. "We were about 3 days out from Santa Fe when they attacked," she recalled, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. 6 men, their faces covered with bandanas. They shot the guard first, then the driver. The coach crashed, and they ordered us all out." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "They made us line up, took our valuables." One of the other passengers, Mr. Donovan, tried to resist when they grabbed his watch, a family heirloom he'd mentioned earlier. They shot him without hesitation. Kieran felt a surge of anger as he watched the pain in her eyes, reliving the memory. The leader, he had cold eyes. Blue. I remember that clearly because everything else about him was covered. He had a scar. She traced a line across her left cheekbone, visible above the bandana, and he wore a silver ring with some kind of black stone. Sheriff Thompson nodded, making notes. "That sounds like Nate Cassidy." The description matches. After they'd taken everything of value, the leader ordered the others to finish it. Zara continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I knew what that meant. When they raised their guns, I ran. I heard shots, screams. I kept running until I couldn't anymore, then hid among some rocks. They searched for a while, but eventually gave up." "You're lucky they didn't find you," Thompson remarked. Zara nodded, her eyes distant. "I stayed hidden until nightfall, then started walking." I thought the stage line went roughly east to west, so I headed west, hoping to find a town or settlement. After that, it's a blur of walking, hiding, and thirst until Mr. Vance found me. You've been incredibly helpful, Miss Calloway, Sheriff Thompson said. I'll wire the territorial marshal with this information. With your description, we might finally have enough to mount a proper hunt for Cassidy's gang. As they left the sheriff's office, Kieran noticed Zara's pallor and the slight tremor in her hands. Without thinking, he offered his arm for support, which she accepted gratefully. Your business in Tucson must be suffering from the delay. The buyer can wait, Kieran said dismissively. Cattle aren't going anywhere. A small smile touched Zara's lips. Nevertheless, I want you to know that I recognize the inconvenience I've caused, and I'm grateful for your patience. Something in her expression, perhaps the sincerity in her eyes or the gentle curve of her smile, made Kieran's heart beat a little faster. Zara nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Of course, you've already delayed too long on my account. The thing is, he continued, I'm concerned about leaving you here alone. Those raiders are still out there, and if word gets back to them that there was a survivor who could identify them. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You think I might be in danger. It's a possibility we can't ignore, Kieran confirmed. Sheriff Thompson is a good man, but he's stretched thin. And once I'm gone, you'll have few allies here. Zara considered this, absently tracing the rim of her water glass with one finger. What do you suggest? Come with me to Tucson, Kieran said, the words coming out in a rush. It's on your way to San Francisco anyway. From there, you can catch the stagecoach west a different company, a safer route. I'll see you safely to your cousins. Her eyebrows rose slightly. All the way to San Francisco? That's nearly 1,000 miles from Tucson. Kieran hadn't actually thought that far ahead, but now that she mentioned it, the idea didn't seem unreasonable. I've got no pressing engagements after Tucson, he said with a shrug, and I've been meaning to see the Pacific for years. Why would you do that for me? Zara asked, genuine confusion in her voice. You've already done more than could be expected of any stranger. Kieran found himself at a loss for words. Why indeed? He barely knew this woman, yet the thought of leaving her to continue her journey alone troubled him deeply. Was it merely concern for her safety, or something more? Let's just say I'd sleep better knowing you reached your destination safely, he finally answered. Zara studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read something in his expression. Finally, she nodded. Very well. I accept your offer, Mr. Vance. When do we leave? Kieran, he reminded her. And we'll leave the day after tomorrow, if you're feeling strong enough. I am, she assured him. Dr. Franklin says I've made remarkable progress. The next day was spent in preparations. Kieran purchased a gentle mare for Zara to ride, along with necessary supplies for the journey. Zara, meanwhile, wrote a letter to her cousin explaining her delay and arranged for it to be forwarded from Tucson once they arrived. She also visited Mrs. Wheeler again, acquiring a riding skirt and a few more practical items for the journey. By evening, everything was ready for their departure the following morning. After dinner, they sat together on the hotel's small porch, watching as the town settled into the quiet rhythms of night. The air was cool, a welcome relief after the heat of the day. Are you nervous? Kieran asked, noticing the pensive expression on Zara's face. She considered the question before answering. Not about traveling with you, if that's what you're asking. More about everything that comes after. Starting a new life in a place I've never been, with family I barely know. Your cousin you're not close? Abigail is several years older than me. She moved west when I was still a child. We've corresponded over the years, but I haven't seen her since I was 10. Zara sighed. I'm grateful for her offer, but I have no illusions. She needs help with her business as much as I need a place to go." Kieran nodded, understanding the practical nature of such arrangements. Still, it's a chance for a fresh start. That's worth something. "Yes," Zara agreed, "though I'm beginning to think the journey itself might be the most valuable part." Their eyes met in the soft lamplight spilling from the hotel windows, and Kieran felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared experience, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of a connection either had anticipated. The moment was broken by Martha Jenkins stepping onto the porch. "Beautiful evening," she commented, seemingly oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. "But you should both get some rest if you're leaving early tomorrow." They rose early the next morning, had a quick breakfast, and set out just as the sun was beginning to crest the eastern horizon. Zara rode her new mare with surprising skill, explaining that she had taken riding lessons as a child before her father's finances made such luxuries impossible. The small herd of cattle set a leisurely pace, which suited them fine. Kieran had planned a route that would keep them close to settlements where possible, both for safety and to ensure Zara had comfortable accommodations each night. The journey to Tucson would take approximately 10 days. As they rode side by side, Kieran found himself opening up to Zara in ways he rarely did with anyone. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, losing his father to a Comanche raid when he was 12, and helping his mother keep the place going until she remarried 3 years later. "My stepfather was a good man," he explained, "but the ranch was his then, not mine. So when I turned 18, I struck out on my own. Been working cattle drives, breaking horses, and occasionally trying my hand at prospecting ever since." "No thoughts of settling down?" Zara asked. "Finding a place of your own?" Kieran shrugged. "Maybe someday. Need to save up enough first. Good land isn't cheap, and I want to do it right when I do it." "A wise approach," she commented. "My father always said it's better to wait for the right opportunity than to rush into a poor one." "Sounds like a sensible man," Kieran remarked. "What kind of merchant was he?" "Textiles, primarily. He imported fine fabrics from Europe and Asia. Business was good until the Panic of '73. Many of his wealthy clients could no longer afford luxuries, and several owed him substantial sums they never paid. By the time he died, there was barely enough to cover his debts. The first few days of their journey passed without incident. They stayed at small ranches or in the occasional settlement, where Zara's presence invariably caused a stir. A single woman traveling with a cattleman was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but Kieran's protective manner and Zara's dignified bearing generally prevented any inappropriate comments. On the fourth night, they camped under the stars, having found no suitable accommodation. Kieran built a small fire and prepared a simple meal while Zara set up her bedroll at a modest distance from his. As they sat by the fire after eating, Zara gazed up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "In Boston, the city lights obscure most of the stars." "One of the benefits of the frontier," Kieran said, following her gaze upward. "Makes a man feel small, doesn't it? Yet significant somehow," Zara added thoughtfully, "as if being a tiny part of something so vast gives meaning rather than diminishing it." Kieran looked at her with newfound appreciation. Most women of his acquaintance weren't given to such philosophical observations. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses, several of them, moving fast. Kieran was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver. "Get behind me," he ordered Zara, his voice low and urgent. She complied without question, eyes wide with fear. "Raiders." "Maybe," Kieran muttered, scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. "Or maybe just travelers. Either way, best to be cautious." 4 riders emerged from the darkness, slowing their horses as they approached the camp. Kieran kept his hand near his weapon but didn't draw it, not wanting to escalate the situation unnecessarily. "Evening," called the lead rider, a burly man with a thick beard. "Saw your fire. Hope you don't mind company." "That depends on the company," Kieran replied evenly. The man chuckled, dismounting. "Fair enough. Name's Walsh. These are my brothers, Tom and Jeremiah, and our friend Cooper. We're headed to Tucson." Kieran relaxed slightly but remained vigilant. "Kieran Vance. This is Miss Calloway." The newcomer's eyes shifted to Zara, and Kieran didn't miss the way they lingered. A protective instinct surged within him. "We've got coffee if you'd like," he offered, hoping to redirect their attention. "But we're turning in soon. Long day tomorrow." Walsh nodded, but his brothers were still eyeing Zara with interest. The youngest, Jeremiah, stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't often see a lady out here," he remarked. "You two married?" Before Kieran could respond, Zara stepped forward, her posture straight and dignified despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "Mr. Vance is escorting me to Tucson after I was separated from my previous traveling party," she said, her voice calm and measured. "My uncle is expecting us there." The lie was smooth, confident. Kieran played along. "Judge Calloway isn't a man who takes kindly to delays," he added, "or to those who interfere with his niece's safe passage." The mention of a judge, especially one allegedly waiting in Tucson, had the desired effect. Walsh's expression became more cautious. "No interference intended," he assured them. "Just being neighborly. We'll water our horses at that creek we passed and make our own camp downstream. Much obliged for the coffee offer, but we've got our own supplies." But when her time came, he found he couldn't bring himself to disturb her sleep. Instead, he remained vigilant until dawn, his revolver close at hand. They broke camp early, before the Walsh brothers stirred. Kieran pushed the cattle harder than usual that day, wanting to put distance between themselves and the four men. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small settlement with a modest inn, where they decided to stop for the night despite having several hours of daylight remaining. "Better safe than sorry," Kieran explained when Zara questioned the early halt. "Those men may be perfectly legitimate travelers, but something didn't sit right with me." Zara didn't argue, her own instincts apparently aligning with his. The inn was simple but clean, with separate rooms available for each of them, a luxury after their shared accommodations in Silver Creek. That evening, as they sat in the inn's small dining room, Zara broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "Those men," she began hesitantly, "they reminded you of the raiders who attacked my stagecoach?" Kieran considered his words carefully. "Not specifically. But men like that traveling together without obvious business. It's not uncommon for them to be up to no good." "You were worried they might recognize me," Zara deduced, "as the witness who could identify Cassidy." "The thought crossed my mind," Kieran admitted. "News travels fast out here, and if Cassidy's heard there was a survivor who spoke to the sheriff." Zara paled slightly but maintained her composure. "Then I'm doubly grateful for your protection." Their journey continued the next day without sign of the Walsh brothers, much to Kieran's relief. More than that, she was intelligent and observant, often noticing details about the landscape or people they encountered that he missed. For her part, Zara seemed to be blossoming in the freedom of the open country. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she rode with increasing confidence each day. Sometimes Kieran would catch her smiling at nothing in particular, just the joy of being alive, perhaps, after her close brush with death. On their 7th day of travel, they stopped at a small trading post for supplies. While Kieran negotiated with the proprietor, Zara browsed the limited selection of goods. She was examining a display of beaded jewelry made by local Apache women when a man entered the store, his spurs jingling loudly on the wooden floor. Kieran glanced up automatically, then froze. The newcomer was tall and lean, with cold blue eyes above a heavy mustache. But what caught Kieran's attention was the thin scar that crossed his left cheekbone and the silver ring with a black stone on his right hand. Nate Cassidy. Kieran shifted position slightly, trying to catch Zara's eye without drawing Cassidy's attention to her. She was partially obscured by a shelf of goods, but if she moved or if Cassidy ventured further into the store. Too late. Zara turned, a beaded bracelet in her hand, and came face to face with the man who had ordered the execution of her fellow passengers. For a moment, she stood paralyzed, her eyes widening in recognition and fear. Cassidy frowned, studying her face. "Do I know you, madam?" Before she could respond, Kieran stepped forward. "There you are, darling," he said smoothly, placing himself between Zara and Cassidy. "Found what you were looking for?" Zara recovered quickly, taking his cue. "Yes, it's perfect," she replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the slight tremor in her hands as she showed him the bracelet. Cassidy's eyes narrowed suspiciously, darting between them. "You folks passing through?" "On our way to Tucson," Kieran confirmed casually. "Just married. Taking my bride to meet my people there." "Congratulations," Cassidy said, though his tone lacked sincerity. "Let's hope he didn't recognize you." They rode away from the trading post at a brisk pace, Kieran repeatedly glancing behind them. They had left their cattle at a nearby pasture with the owner's permission, planning to collect them after restocking supplies. Now, Kieran led them on a circuitous route back to the herd, wary of being followed. "Do you think he suspected?" Zara asked when they finally slowed their pace. "Hard to say," Kieran admitted. "You did well not giving anything away, but he seemed suspicious." "What do we do now?" Kieran considered their options. The terrain became increasingly challenging, rocky paths that slowed their progress, dry washes that forced detours. They camped that night in a sheltered canyon, forgoing a fire despite the cooling temperatures to avoid drawing attention. As they prepared their cold supper, Zara seemed lost in thought, her movements mechanical. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the gentle lowing of the cattle. "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Tucson." Kieran looked up, waiting for her to continue. "My original plan was to take the stagecoach to San Francisco," she said. "But after what happened, I'm not sure I can bear the thought of traveling that way again." "There's the railroad," Kieran suggested. "It doesn't go all the way to San Francisco yet, but you could take it as far as it goes, then connect to a stagecoach for the final stretch." Zara nodded, considering this. "That might be better, but there's another option I've been considering." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "I could stay in Tucson at least for a while, find work there. A woman with your education and background could find decent employment there. And I'd have at least one friend in the city," she added with a small smile. "More than a friend," Kieran responded without thinking, then felt heat rise to his face as he realized how his words might be interpreted. "I mean, you'd have my protection, for as long as you needed it." Zara's smile deepened, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "I appreciate that, Kieran. More than I can say." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Kieran cleared his throat. "We should get some rest. I'll take first watch tonight." "Wake me for my turn this time," Zara insisted. "You need sleep too." He agreed reluctantly, though privately he resolved to let her sleep through the night again. The danger posed by Cassidy was too real to risk her being on watch alone. The next morning, they continued their journey, even more cautious than before. They avoided the few small settlements in their path, making camp instead in defensible locations Kieran selected carefully. On the 9th day, with Tucson less than a day's ride away, disaster struck. They were crossing a narrow pass between rocky hills when gunfire erupted from above. A bullet kicked up dust near Kieran's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. "Ambush!" he shouted, drawing his revolver. "Take cover!" Zara needed no urging, immediately guiding her mare behind a large boulder as more shots rang out. The cattle scattered in panic, some running back the way they'd come, others pushing forward through the pass. Kieran fired back at their attackers, trying to locate their positions among the rocks above. He counted at least 3 gunmen, possibly more. One bullet grazed his arm, tearing his sleeve and drawing blood, but the wound was minor. "Kieran," Zara called from her position. "Are you hit?" "Just a scratch," he assured her, ducking behind another boulder as bullets pinged off the rocks around him. "Stay down," a familiar voice called from above. "Give us the woman, Vance, and you can ride away. We've no quarrel with you, Cassidy." So he had recognized Zara after all. "Go to hell, Cassidy," Kieran shouted back, firing in the direction of the voice. A bullet splintered rock inches from his head in response. "My father's Derringer, it's in my saddlebag." He'd forgotten about the small 2-shot pistol she'd mentioned finding in her father's effects. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Can you reach it?" he asked. She nodded, carefully edging toward her horse, which had remained surprisingly calm despite the gunfire. Keeping low, she retrieved the tiny pistol from her saddlebag. "I'm not much of a shot," she admitted when she'd returned to cover. "But I'll do what I can. Save it as a last resort," Kieran advised. "We need to conserve ammunition." The afternoon wore on, the occasional exchange of gunfire punctuating long stretches of tense silence. The sun beat down mercilessly, and their water supply was running dangerously low. Kieran's arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, but he ignored the pain, focusing instead on their predicament. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Kieran noticed movement on the ridge to their left, not Cassidy's men, but figures on horseback approaching rapidly. For a moment, he feared reinforcements for the outlaws, but then he recognized the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. "It's the law," he called to Zara. "Sheriff's posse." The newcomers immediately engaged Cassidy's gang, their superior numbers and position quickly turning the tide. Within minutes, the outlaws were in retreat, abandoning their ambush for the safety of the hills beyond. The sheriff, a stocky man with a weathered face and iron-gray hair, rode down to where Kieran and Zara had taken cover. "Kieran Vance?" he called. "Sheriff Morgan, Tucson. Got a telegraph from Sheriff Thompson in Silver Creek saying you might be in trouble." Seems he was right. "Your timing is impeccable, Sheriff," Kieran replied with feeling, helping Zara to her feet. "This is Miss Zara Calloway, the witness to Cassidy's stagecoach massacre." Sheriff Morgan tipped his hat to Zara. "Madam, brave of you to testify. Most folks wouldn't have the courage." "I did what anyone would do," Zara replied modestly. "Not anyone," the sheriff contradicted. "But we're grateful nonetheless. We've been after Cassidy's gang for months. With your testimony and what we learned today, we might finally bring them to justice." With the sheriff's posse as escort, they collected the scattered cattle and continued toward Tucson. By nightfall, the lights of the city were visible in the distance, a welcome sight after their harrowing day. They entered Tucson the following morning, the sheriff leading them to the cattle pens where Kieran's buyer was waiting impatiently. Despite the delay and the loss of a few head during the ambush, the sale went through at a fair price. Kieran found himself with a tidy sum enough to consider some of the plans he'd been discussing with Zara during their journey. After settling their business, Sheriff Morgan escorted Zara to his office to give her official statement about the stagecoach attack. Kieran accompanied her, unwilling to let her face the ordeal alone. "You've been through enough," the sheriff told Zara after recording her testimony. Cassidy and his men won't trouble you again, we'll see to that. But until they're captured, I'd advise caution. Miss Calloway will be under my protection, Kieran assured him firmly. The sheriff raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on the apparent permanence of this arrangement. They found lodging at Tucson's finest hotel, where Kieran insisted on separate rooms despite the expense. After their shared accommodations on the trail, it seemed proper to observe the conventions of civilized society now that they were back in it. That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant, both still processing the events of the past few weeks. "What will you do now?" Zara asked, watching Kieran over the rim of her water glass. "With the cattle sold, I mean." He considered the question. "I've been thinking about that. There's good land available south of here, near the Sonoran border. Might be time to put down some roots." Zara's expression brightened. "A ranch of your own?" "Maybe," Kieran admitted. "Got enough from this sale for a decent start. Would need to build up a herd slowly, but—" He trailed off, suddenly aware of how his plans might sound to her like an invitation she hadn't asked for. "It sounds wonderful," Zara said softly. "A place of your own. After all these years of wandering." Something in her tone gave him courage. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might consider staying. In Tucson, I mean. At least until Cassidy's caught." Zara's eyes met his, something warm and hopeful in their depths. "I think that would be wise, for safety's sake." "Just for safety?" Kieran asked, his heart beating faster. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Perhaps not only for safety." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Kieran purchased a modest property 20 miles south of Tucson, 300 acres with a small cabin, a natural spring, and grazing land sufficient for the beginnings of a cattle operation. The previous owner, an aging widower eager to return east to his children, was happy to sell at a fair price. Zara, meanwhile, found employment at Tucson's newly established newspaper, the Arizona Star. Her education and writing skills made her valuable as both a typesetter and occasional contributor, particularly for articles aimed at the growing female population of the territory. They saw each other often, though propriety dictated certain limitations. Kieran would ride into town every few days, ostensibly for supplies but primarily to spend time with Zara. They would dine together at the hotel restaurant or take walks through the rapidly developing streets of Tucson, discussing his progress on the ranch and her experiences at the newspaper. During one such visit, approximately a month after their arrival in Tucson, Sheriff Morgan sought them out with news. "Thought you'd want to know," he told them over coffee at the hotel. "We got Cassidy." Zara's hand flew to her mouth. "You captured him?" The sheriff's expression turned grim. "Not exactly. There was a shootout at a ranch north of here. Cassidy and 2 of his men were killed. The rest scattered, but we've got leads on most of them." A weight seemed to lift from Kieran's shoulders. "So it's over? Zara's safe." "As safe as anyone in these parts," Sheriff Morgan confirmed. "The threat from Cassidy's gang is finished." The news brought both relief and a new uncertainty. With the danger removed, Zara was free to continue to San Francisco as originally planned. The prospect filled Kieran with a dread he could no longer ignore. That evening, as they walked back to her boarding house after dinner, Kieran finally found the courage to speak what was in his heart. "With Cassidy gone," he began hesitantly, "I suppose you'll be making plans to continue to San Francisco." Zara stopped walking, turning to face him in the soft glow of a street lamp. "Is that what you think I should do?" Her directness caught him off guard. "I think you should do what makes you happy." "And if staying in Arizona would make me happy?" she challenged softly. Kieran's heart raced. "The ranch isn't much yet," he said, the words tumbling out. "But it could be. The cabin needs work, a woman's touch, my mother would say." and Tucson's growing every day. Your position at the newspaper could become something more substantial in time. Kieran, Zara interrupted gently. Are you asking me to stay? He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I'm asking for more than that, he admitted. From the moment I found you lying in the dust, something changed for me. I knew I wasn't leaving without you then, and I know I don't want to be without you now. Zara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she stepped closer to him. I've been waiting for you to say that, she whispered. I ain't much of a talker, Kieran admitted with a self-deprecating smile. More comfortable with cattle than words. You're doing fine, Zara assured him, her hand coming to rest against his chest. And the answer is yes. I'll stay with you, if that's what you're asking. It is, Kieran confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Zara Calloway. Have from the start, I think, though I was too stubborn to admit it. And I love you, Kieran Vance, she replied without hesitation. Enough to build a life here, far from everything I've known. In the soft glow of the street lamp, he drew her into his arms and kissed her gently at first, then with a passion that had been building since that fateful day when he'd found her in the dust. 3 months later, they were married in Tucson's newly constructed church, with Sheriff Morgan giving the bride away and Martha Jenkins, who had traveled all the way from Silver Creek for the occasion, dabbing tears from her eyes in the front pew. The ranch, which they named New Horizon, flourished under their joint efforts. Kieran's knowledge of cattle and Zara's head for business proved a powerful combination. They expanded the cabin into a proper home, added a barn and corral, and gradually increased their herd. Zara continued to write for the newspaper occasionally, her articles about frontier life from a woman's perspective gaining popularity beyond Arizona territory. Eventually, she compiled these writings into a book that found modest success among Eastern readers fascinated by life in the West. A year after their wedding, their first child was born, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Zara's mother. 2 years later, a son joined their family, named James for Kieran's father. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Kieran and Zara would often sit on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes they would reminisce about their extraordinary beginning, a cowboy finding a woman lying in the dust, refusing to leave without her. Do you ever regret it? Kieran asked once, his arm around his wife as they gazed at the starlit sky. Staying here instead of going to San Francisco? Zara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Not for a single moment. This is where I was always meant to be, I just didn't know it until you found me. Best thing I ever did, Kieran replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Finding you. In the years that followed, New Horizon Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and warm hospitality. Travelers passing through often remarked on the obvious bond between the rancher and his Eastern-born wife, a love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances and flourished against all odds in the wild, beautiful landscape they now called home. And whenever anyone asked how they met, Kieran would always begin the story the same way. I was driving cattle to Tucson when I found her lying in the dust, and I knew right then and there I wasn't leaving without her. To which Zara would always add, with a loving glance at her husband, and thank God he didn't. Their love story became something of a legend in those parts, the tale of a cowboy and the woman he rescued, who together built a life as vast and enduring as the western sky under which they had found each other. As their children grew and New Horizon prospered, Kieran and Zara remained as devoted to each other as they had been on that dusty trail to Tucson. Their partnership was a testament to the truth they had discovered together, that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a chance encounter, and the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful destinations. In the spring of 1896, 20 years after Kieran had first found Zara lying in the dust, they hosted a celebration at New Horizon Ranch, not just of their anniversary, but of all they had built together. Friends and family gathered from near and far, including Sheriff Morgan, now retired, Martha Jenkins from Silver Creek, and even Zara's cousin Abigail, who had finally made the journey from San Francisco to meet the family her cousin had chosen over the life she had offered. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit throughout the ranch yard, Kieran found Zara standing alone, gazing at the gathering with quiet joy. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. She turned to him, the years having added character to her beauty rather than diminishing it. "Completely," she answered, reaching up to touch his face now weathered by sun and wind, with gray threading through his once dark hair. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't come along that day." "I try not to think about that," Kieran admitted. "The thought of not finding you." He shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. "But you did find me," Zara reminded him softly. "And you didn't leave without me." "Best decision I ever made," he said, drawing her closer. "Every day since has proved it." As the celebration continued around them, with their children and grandchildren filling the ranch with laughter and life, Kieran and Zara shared a tender kiss, a reminder of the love that had begun in the dust of the Arizona territory and flourished into something as enduring as the land itself. In the glow of the lanterns, with the stars emerging overhead, they joined hands and returned to their guests, two people who had found in each other not just love, but home.